Walter Isaacson, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks. It's a great honor.
So you are known for writing the definitive biographies on a whole host of people. Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, Einstein, Da Vinci, the list goes on. You've just written a book that's different in nature, the greatest—
And short.
65
right.
pages, everyone.
Yeah.
The greatest sentences ever written about the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah.
I think to kick us off, I'll just read the few sentences that we're going to unpack in this conversation.
Well, just that great second sentence, that we hold these truths to be self-evident.
Do you want to say that?
That all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
It's 26 words that defined our nation.
They really become the centerpiece for the American political
Yeah, and we're
project.
about to hit our 250th birthday, and we're in no mood for a birthday celebration. We've become so divided, so poisoned. Everything tears us apart, whether it's should you wear a mask or not, or should you, whatever. And I wanted people to reflect as we go into the 250th that there are a lot of values we share, a lot of common ground we have, and just like we're going up to Thanksgiving, going into family birthday parties, sometimes when you don't get along as a family, you calm down for a birthday party and say, let's reflect on A, how lucky we are, and what is our common ground.
If you could just take us back in history, can you drop us into the moment in time when these words are written?
Sure. In June of 1776, we're about to have a revolution. We've had Lexington and Concord, and the Continental Congress decides it has to appoint a committee in order to declare why we're having this revolution. It may have been the last time Congress appointed like a really good committee. It has Thomas Jefferson on it, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams are among those on it. And those of us who write biographies and we write about creativity, innovation, we sometimes make it seem like just a guy or a gal goes to a garage or garret, has a light bulb moment. No, creativity and innovation is a team sport. It's a collaborative effort. And so what happened in the last few days of June of 1776 is this drafting committee went through 5 drafts of the Declaration, and more importantly, 5 drafts of the we hold these truths to be self-evident sentence. And being an old editor and writer myself, I thought, all right, let's look at what each of those words meant, how they agonized over each word, because we kind of know the sentence almost by heart, but I don't. It's like being at church or synagogue where you chant along with the prayer, but you don't stop and think, what does this really mean? So I figured one way to get us in a less divisive mood in this country was we could all reflect on what does that mission statement sentence mean?
Well, I think it might be useful for the listener to know what the original formulation of the text was. I think most people who have had any amount of civics education will know the one that you just read. But originally it was, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal and independent, that from equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which these are the preservation of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Obviously, those aren't the final words that we end up with.
No, and it's particularly interesting because if you go to the basement of the Library of Congress, and I've been pushing them, take it out of the basement and display this first draft next to the final draft. And if you take my book and you open the end leaf, you'll see that first draft. And let's start where you did, which is we hold these truths to be sacred. That's what Jefferson writes. And then you can see the black backslashes of a printer's pen that Ben Franklin used because he was a printer.
You can decipher the edits based sort of on the handwriting as well.
Yeah, I mean, having written about Ben Franklin, I know the pen he used. I know that as a printer, you use backslashes when you're editing a document. And he takes out sacred and he puts in self-evident.
Well, I want to go line by line. Before we get there, I think one misconception is that people think the Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson. It's famously in big text on his tombstone. As you noted, it's a committee of 5, notably Ben Franklin and John Adams as well. Can you just give us a little bit more on each of those characters and what they brought to the table that was different from Tom Jefferson?
Right. And, you know, whenever you're looking, people say, what is leadership? You've written about Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or whatever. Well, part of it is being a great leader, but part of it is creating a great team.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to know what's a great team, look at our founders. You had to have somebody among the founders, not just on this committee, of high rectitude like Washington, people who are passionate like John Adams and his cousin Samuel, people who are really smart. Jefferson falls in that category along with Madison. But you also have to somebody who's the glue that brings them together. And that was Ben Franklin's role. So sitting in that second floor of a rented room on Market Street in Philadelphia that Jefferson had rented, that's where that team met.
You start in the book by analyzing the first word we, and we hold these truths to be self-evident. And you basically explain that we indicates that they were building a new society, not based on divinity or on monarchy, but on a social contract.
Right.
Can
Yeah.
you explain that?
We hold these truths, same word that begins the Constitution 11 years later, we the people. And who's we? Well, we'll have to get to, is it all men? Is it created? Is it enslaved people? But let's just start with the we. It's not about 59 or 60 people gathering in Philadelphia. It's about a social contract that we, the people, come into. And what Jefferson and Franklin and Adams had all read John Locke, for example, and Thomas Hobbes and David Hume.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who does the contract social. They all write about this notion that when we didn't have government, when we were all kind of in a state of nature, as Hobbes said, life was nasty, brutish, and short. It was a mess. It was anarchy. So we come together and form a social contract. And that contract means we give up a little bit of our freedom to just run around, kill people, do whatever. But in return, we become part of a civilized society and a governance. So we should reflect on what is a social contract, because that's what we entered into with the Declaration and the Constitution. And why that was something different. It used to be, as you said, the divine right of kings gave government the power, or the sword of a conqueror gave government the power. No, the power of government now comes from we.
The next words, we hold these truths to be self-evident, you touched on this just a second ago, was originally, we hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable. Sacred was struck, it felt too religious. And I think it, as you write in the book, gets at this sort of push and pull between how they want to interweave faith into the text. Can you tell us about this change?
Yeah, and I'll go on to the next part too, because it's a balance. It goes on, as you quoted the earlier sentence, that they derive rights. And John Adams, who's a little bit more conventionally religious than Franklin and Jefferson, instead of they derive rights, he puts they're endowed by their creator with rights. So in the editing of one half of a sentence, you see at one point, Franklin crossing out the word sacred and making it self-evident, so it's rationality gives us these rights. But they also want to say, yes, they're endowed by their creator. They invoke the creator. So even in this half of a sentence, you see them striking a balance between the role of rationality and the role of divine providence in helping our nation become what it is. I was studying that more than a decade ago when I was first writing about Ben Franklin, and I worked at CNN, a network you may have heard of. And after I was reading about how they made those edits and balancing the role of the creator and divine providence with the role of rationality, I go into the morning meeting, and there's a crossfire meeting, and that was a show we did, a debate show. And somebody said, oh, we have a great crossfire topic for tonight. Judge Roy Moore in Alabama has put the 10 Commandments on the steps of his courthouse, but a federal judge has said he's got to take it down, and he won't do it, and they're going to send in the marshals. And everybody goes, wonderful, we have a great crossfire show. Who's going to be for the 10 Commandments? Who's going to be against the 10 Commandments? I go, okay, great.
Which were you? What side were you on?
I was just running CNN. It's like get the best guests on either side. But I'll tell you what side I was on. I went home that evening, and I'm looking at this beautiful sentence where they balance it, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, here's how the founders used faith, the Ten Commandments, the role of divine providence, reason, to unite us. They did a balance that united us. And here we were in the media, and basically here were the politicians using the Ten Commandments to divide us.
Right.
And I remember my stomach felt a bit queasy, like both the media and politicians had now made religion a divisive issue rather than a unifying issue. Whereas I'm looking at Franklin, Jefferson, and Adams and the others on the committee, and they're trying to make a balance so that we respect the rights of religion, but we also respect the role of rationality and reason in determining our rights.
In all of these edits that they were making, do we have any understanding of if there was any level of contention between the authors in terms of?
No, there was a bad level of contention once they did the draft and they submitted it to the whole Congress. Now, you can imagine, 60 people or so trying to edit it. And they eviscerate a lot of it, including what Jefferson writes, even though he owned slaves, he wrote an attack on slavery as among the bills in particular against the king. Yeah. And they took all that out. And he becomes quite angry at the edits done in the Committee of the Whole Congress. And Franklin has to calm him down and tells him this wonderful story about when he was a printer. A person came in named John Thompson and wanted a big sign saying, John Thompson makes hats for ready cash, hat maker, et cetera. And everybody kept editing it. And finally, John Thompson said, forget about it. Just give me a picture of a hat and I'll hang it outside. And Franklin said, I've always made it a rule since then never to write things that are going to be edited by a committee. So maybe that goes against my saying that usually collaboration makes things better. I think Jefferson was upset at the edits done by the Congress, but you know what? The document turns out really well.
The next line, and you alluded to this, that all men are created equal. It was a rejection of social hierarchy that was in the old world in Europe.
We had an aristocracy, but there was an aristocracy in Old England, feudal aristocracy. You're born into, being an aristocrat, an earl or a duke with lands, or a commoner, or whatever caste you were, and you kind of stayed within that class. And when they say all men are created equal, there's a lot to unpack there. We have to understand the issue of women and slavery and other things. But among the things, too, we have to unpack is what do they mean that they're created equal? Now, it's clear that all people aren't equal. I mean, if I look around, there are people who play basketball better than me, much. There are people I write better than maybe a few people. Some people are taller and smarter and better looking, and people have different talents and traits. But what they're saying is that a matter of rationality and reason, they're all equal participants in this social contract, and thus they have equal rights, political rights and social rights, and that's what they mean by all men are created equal.
And it was definitely a departure from European society, and I think it's notable in the fact that Ben Franklin is the son of someone who was a soap and candle maker.
Sure.
Alexander Hamilton being born out of wedlock, and their life trajectory would have been totally different in Europe.
And you could even flip it, which Ben Franklin has a son who also is born illegitimate, but his son becomes very desirous of being part of the aristocracy and puts on airs, becomes royal governor of New Jersey. And Ben Franklin writes his autobiography, begins with the words, "Dear son, we're trying to create a new type of nation in which there are no social hierarchy classes."
But of course, there is one class.
Well, that's just the huge contradiction in our nation. Imagine that scene on the second floor on Market Street. You got Ben Franklin, John Adams, and Jefferson. Jefferson's using the mahogany writing desk. He's brought from Monticello. There's also somebody else in the room.
Robert Hemings.
Robert Hemings is the young slave, valet, always with Jefferson. Robert Hemings has a younger sister, Sally, who will end up becoming Jefferson's mistress. But even when Jefferson dies, he doesn't free Robert or Sally Hemings. He owns more than 400 slaves, and yet he writes that phrase that all men are created equal. And so you have within the founding this contradiction. And unfortunately, when we teach history, people are either now trying to pull down every statue of the founders or whitewash all the flaws of the founders. And what you really have to say is they set us on a mission. They didn't get it totally right. It's been a 450-year process.
Yeah.
But at the core contradiction, one of them is they wanted no social hierarchies, all men are created equal, and yet they allowed enslavement. Even John Adams, who didn't believe in slavery, he says, but it's too hot of a rail to touch right now. They compromise it.
Well, how do you think someone like Thomas Jefferson personally understood the contradiction? I mean, he's someone who, as you mentioned, wrote, slavery was a moral depravity, a hideous blot, a cruel war against human nature, and yet he enslaved more than 600 men, women, and children who he didn't free within his lifetime. At the time that the Declaration was signed, despite these words, 1 in 50 people in the colonies were enslaved. How do you think they personally understood this clear hypocrisy?
Well, they definitely understood it was a problem, and you quoted Jefferson correctly of saying how abhorrent it was. John Adams is brutal in his condemnation of slavery, and yet he says it's too hard to touch it right now. So they knew that this was a contradiction and that they compromised on it.
Do you think that when they wrote the words, not all of them, but some of them thought of them as aspirational?
Yeah, that's, I think, the great point you just made, which is it's a living sentence. It's not a declaration of exactly who we are. It's a mission statement of who we should aspire to be. I think even Jefferson, who's the one, Franklin and Adams didn't own slaves when they wrote that sentence, but Jefferson, even he knew that this was going to be a process, a living aspiration mission statement. And that's the arc of American history. So those who would hate American history and say it's born in sin, or those who would totally, clean it up, you have to say, no, how do we get there? And 7 years after they write that sentence, Abraham Lincoln refers to it.
Right.
And he says, conceived a new type of nation, born in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. He's referring to this, the greatest sentence.
Yeah.
And he's dedicating a cemetery. And I can't remember, but more than 1,000 bodies are being buried in that cemetery because they are trying to move us towards that aspiration.
The words really are used as a vehicle for change. In the book, you also write about how Elizabeth Cady Stanton echoes the words in her fight for women's rights. I had learned when we had on law professor Akhil Amar on Honestly, how these words came to influence the first anti-slavery society, the Abolition Society founded by Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush. So do you think that was intentional as Jefferson is writing these words, or a good fortune of history that throughout time?
No, I think it was intentional. It was. In fact, if you look at the words, they're all aspirational. We'll get to in a minute. I don't want to leap ahead in the sentence. But, Locke is writing about life, liberty, and property. And when Jefferson and Franklin do it, it becomes like pursuit of happiness. These are expansive phrases that allow each new generation to say, how are we going to move in this direction?
Yeah. It also, in some ways, I think, and correct my characterization, but foreshadows the Civil War in the sense, at the time you have, on one hand, people who see it as an aspirational text, and then, on the other hand, people like Congressman James Jackson, who you write about in the book, who at the time is arguing that the Bible sanctions slavery. And so clearly, I guess I'm trying not to gloss history in the sense of not everyone in the room was on the same page about the aspirational nature.
No, and had they been, they could have ended slavery, and they have to make the compromise at the heart of the Constitution 11 years later. And one, Ben Franklin always believed that compromises may not make great heroes, but they do make great democracies, that every now and then we have to say, okay, we'll give a little, take a little, and fine. The question is, and historians can debate it, did they have to make that compromise then? You probably would have had trouble getting the Virginians and other southern states in had you abolished slavery outright at the beginning. But that's why history is interesting and people are interesting. We can wrestle with, were they wrong to make the compromise that may appall us these days,
Right.
and certainly ends up leading to a civil war where they can't keep papering over it or compromising it. But I do think all of them knew that they weren't describing what America is and will always be. They were describing the aspirations for not only America, but maybe an entire world, and perhaps half the world has done so far, that follows this footpath of founding a nation based on a social contract in which all are considered equal.
One more note on this, I just think it's important to say, and I'm curious to get more perspective from you on how they were thinking about this, was despite some of their moral opposition to slavery, it doesn't seem clear that they were in any way proponents of Black and white Americans sharing political power. I guess my question to you is, do we have any more understanding of where they thought political power should lie? And,
Well, I mean, I love to use Benjamin Franklin as sort of the pathfinder in his own life as a metaphor for America's life. And having once had 2 or 3 slaves when he was a printer and they end up free, he ends up, as we said, becoming the president for the Society for the Abolition of Slavery. But in between, he's a big supporter of the schools of Dr. Bray, which is schools for Black slaves, freed slaves, education. And he writes, by being involved with these schools, I shed some of my prejudices and I have a natural understanding now of the talents of all races, including the Black race, and I feel bad that I ever thought otherwise. So, yes, you don't have a Jefferson in his lifetime ever thinking that Blacks and whites should have equal power. But Franklin gets there, and Franklin and others lead the way. And, we all have to look at the flaws we all may have within us, the mistakes we all have made. And Benjamin Franklin kept a ledger of where he was wrong and how to right himself. And one of those was having tolerated the advertising of slavery in his newspaper. But he rectifies it by becoming the president of the society, but also funding the schools of Dr. Bray.
The next line, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator. The original formulation was that from equal creation, they derive rights.
As I say, John Adams puts in by their creator. But it's a great balance between the role of divine providence and the role of rationality.
It brings us back to some of the questions about God, which we've touched on. One interesting point that you highlight in the book that I think listeners will be curious to learn about is that some of the writers were deists, which don't have a strong foothold in American society today. Why is it important to understand?
Jefferson and Franklin were definitely deists, and John Adams, who was a Unitarian, also called himself a deist. And that was the predominant religion or religious focus or outlook of most, I would say more than 50% of the people who signed the Declaration.
And what did they believe?
Which is that there's some benevolent or some creator set up the universe, but not an interventionist God who sort of throws down thunderbolts when mad and you can pray for divine intervention if you want the saints to be able to beat the Rams or something, but that it's just a creator. And the phrase in the Declaration, which is in the first, not the second sentence, that Jefferson uses is the laws of nature and of nature's God. It's the only invocation of God, and that is sort of the deist concept of God, is that you have a universe, you have these laws of nature and nature's God, but all 3 of them kind of did not embrace things like miracles of Jesus and the divinity of Christ. In fact, Jefferson himself, the famous Jefferson Bible, which is at Monticello, takes a razor and cuts out the parts where in the Bible where it refers to miracles, even the miracles of Jesus, but leaves in the moral teachings. So that's a very long way.
He literally edits the Bible for his own
Yeah, he
liking.
literally, with a razor blade, you can find pictures of it online or go to Monticello and see the real thing. So that's a very long-winded way to say they were awed by the beauty and the grand divine providence of creation, but they did not have the same conventional religious beliefs that sometimes people try to impose on them today. They were not traditional, say, Christians in terms of other than following the moral precepts. Now, I say that all because the main thing that they were was in a city of Philadelphia filled with people of different religious beliefs. There were very conventional evangelicals, but there was also Quakers, there were Protestants, there were Presbyterians, there were Moravians, there were Jews, there were Baptists and freed slaves. And so they create a space where a lot of religions can coexist, unlike the Europe they were fleeing, where you're having religious wars, even between the two types of Protestantism in England, the Puritan but certainly the wars of religion in France and all. They were saying, no, we're trying to create a nation with multiple freedoms of belief.
I was about to say, this is the whole shtick of the revolution. Well, freedom of taxation, of course, but also religion to practice and not be forced to practice.
Right. And we sometimes think the Pilgrims came over for religious freedom. Actually not. The Pilgrims came over so they could practice their own brand of Puritan reformism, and they impose in Boston an established church. Increase Mather and Cotton Mather do. That's why Ben Franklin runs away. But eventually you get to a society in which you don't have to run away from someplace if you're an unconventional religious belief. We believe in freedom of religion.
I think the final line of these few sentences is the one that most Americans probably hold closest to them, which is, I'll read it in full, as we've been saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's the most famous part. How did the founders conceptualize life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?
At first, the way it is in John Locke, is life, liberty, and property. And even in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is written in June of 1776, it mentions estates and property. And I think there was a belief, and still is, and is a belief I share, that allowing people to work, produce, have private property, succeed, do well by hard work or maybe just by luck, that was part of freedom. That was part of our liberty, was having estates and property. And that's the fundamental premise of John Locke, where he talks about you can take things out of the state of nature and mix your labor with it, and they become your private property. But he was very much, in some ways, you call him a conservative because he believes in private. But he adds a caveat that becomes known as the Lockean proviso. He said, as long as there's good enough left in common, meaning that everybody got to share in the benefits of society. So that's one of the tensions in the United States. Is
today
how
as well.
much do we? Oh yeah, the book is written for today.
Healthcare, education,
healthcare, education, police protection, whatever it may be. We have all these debates. Our hair gets on fire. People say, I'm going to, move to Canada or move out in New York City or whatever because of political debates. But it's really just a question of, okay, how much do we keep in the common and how much becomes private, and that's a balance.
We're having this conversation at this level up here, which is, the text from almost 250 years ago. But this very concept was on full display last week over the government shutdown, overextending ACA tax credit.
Franklin
it's this exact question.
Understood the question of how much health care do we put in common. And he ends up creating the Hospital of Philadelphia. And some of it is for common benefits. The motto is to pour forth benefits for the common good is divine, meaning you're serving the Lord if you're serving his fellow creatures.
Right.
But it's, partly a public-private thing. So, obviously not all of healthcare is totally in the common, but some of it is. They got the balance there. Somehow, nowadays, we're not good at the balance. We have to shut the government down as opposed to saying, all right, most of us can agree on some 70% solution and accept it, but we don't do that these days. Right. And that's why I wrote this book is let's figure out common ground, which is at the basis of this sentence, and then that forms a moral basis for the American dream, which is that we're a land of opportunity.
Before we get to American Dream, I thought you had two interesting phrases in the book about this question of how common ground has changed over the past 250 years. I think you call it the skyboxification or the velvet roping. And the idea is that there used to be areas in public life that were equalized, where everyone would come from different levels of economic or
we'd all stand in the same line.
And that's changed.
By the way, I got to give Michael Sandel, the great political philosopher, he came up with the word skyboxification because when he and I used to go to Fenway Park, we all went through the same entrances, sat in the bleachers, everybody sat in the stands, ate the same soggy hot dogs. But now we have different lines for different people, VIP lines, skyboxes, but that's true of everything, including
airport
K
lounge.
through 12, even K through 12 education, even healthcare, whatever.
Totally.
So you want to have some rights. I mean, I'm going to not be hypocritical. I just flew up from New Orleans. I took the Clear Lane or the TSA Pre or whatever. But we also want to make sure that there are some common ground that we all share. Otherwise, you build up resentments. If you want to know what happens when you build up a lot of resentments, look around today.
The other thing that came to mind as I was reading the book is that everyone used to serve in the military. And that
we used to have institutions.
Where everyone did the same thing.
When my dad dropped out took a leave from college in 1944, I have a picture of him in front of the ROTC building of Tulane with 6 of his friends. Still know them all. Sam Cornswet, all of them.
Oh.
My dad's got this Navy uniform, CB thing on, and little hat. Some of them have Army uniform. They wanted to make sure they all went off to war, and before the war was over. And my dad it's like in the movies. He was in a platoon with people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all serving their country. Nowadays, finding institutions for common ground, shared service is less so. I used to be chair of Teach for America, which Wendy Kopp was the person who actually ran it and started it. But that was so we could all spend some time in service with people of different backgrounds and give back. I think, if we get out of this fever zone we're in, maybe a movement towards national service, voluntary, but at least making it, you have both the opportunity and the expectation that you spend a couple of years in the military or serving as a police officer, whatever it may be, a teacher, where you have some common ground with people of different backgrounds.
Because the idea is that it would make society more cohesive because people from different educational and financial backgrounds come together in a way that we don't have anything else that replicates that. Outside of that solution, how else do we get to a better commons?
Well, I'm going to give a plug for the Free Press and for Barry, because I think one of the things that destroys the commons is not simply, the commons was an actual physical place. It was the pieces of land that the aristocracy left in common so that the commoners, that's where the word comes from, could graze their sheep on the land. So everybody had a stake and an opportunity to be part of society. And then the commons is also services we have in common, like, volunteer fire department that Franklin does, or police department, or K through, Academy for Education of Youth, or the hospital. But the commons is also our information commons. How do we share information? How do we share debates and discussion? How do we share facts? And that also has fallen prey to people going to their own ends of the talk radio dial or their own parts of the cable networks or their own algorithms bring them down their own rabbit holes in social media. And so one way we get back is having a shared commons of discussion, civil discourse, and information. I think the free press is dedicated not only to free speech, but to a civil discourse where people can share things. A lot of both the technology and the algorithms and everything else in digital media almost seems engineered to divide us, to
it is.
catch us by engaging us, by enraging us. So then, well, can you believe this or WTF? And that the algorithm says, oh, I'm going to bring you down that rabbit hole. Well, one way to get out of it is things like the free press and other places. We can have civil discourse. Opinions of different sides are respected. It's difficult. There's probably, and you see in arguments, whether it be on Tucker Carlson or other side, that maybe people are what we would call beyond the pale, to use the old phrase about Russia. But in general, we want an expansive common ground of ideas and speech.
You know, these few sentences really premised the idea of the American dream. And in order for the American dream to flourish, we need a strong commons. I have two questions here. On one hand, when these words were written, it was still extremely difficult to break out of your social and economic station in life. Even in the United States, that was building something totally different. And even, you know, Ben Franklin and Alex Hamilton
but
were able to
let
do
me push back slightly after the premise. Ben Franklin, as you say, is a runaway. 10th son of an immigrant, runs away with 3 coins, famously, in his pocket when he gets to Philadelphia. Alexander Hamilton is also an immigrant, but also born out of wedlock. Ben Franklin becomes, by some measurement, the richest person in the colonies. Leave aside how you value land and slaves or whatever. But he creates a whole business empire. So Franklin writes his autobiography saying, hey, this is a new nation where a person straggling into Philadelphia with just 3 coins in his pocket can end up standing before kings and not having to kneel.
I think the debate that was present then and also present today is, has that always been the exception or the rule in terms of in this American project?
I'll give you some facts on it. And this is where the American dream is endangered. And one other reason I wrote this book, and I care about it. If you were born the decade I was born in, more than 80% of people born that decade would end up doing better than their parents financially. Inflation adjusted better. Be able at age 30, a majority of them had a house they owned and were married, could have kids. If you were born in the past 30 years, you have less than a 50% chance of what you call rising, from your circumstance. You have less than a 50% chance of being better off than your parents. Now, that should punch you in the gut, because you have really changed society, where for the first time in American history, people can't say, I'm going to be better off than my parents, and parents can't say, I've worked really hard and my kids are going to have a better life than I do. So when you lose that key element of the American dream, which is each generation can be more successful. And nowadays, I think, as I say, half the people of my generation owned a home and were married and may have kids by age 30. I think that's like 12% now. So I don't think it's always been true in American history that you couldn't rise from the lowest quintile.
Why do you think so many young people feel like it was never real? Where do you think that sentiment comes from?
Well, it's not real for them. And right now,
but I think a lot of people would say that it's always been a little bit of a myth.
I haven't heard that. I think you can look through American history and you can look at my grandfather, my father, myself. I shouldn't take anecdotes, but you can look at the statistics, and generally we created more jobs. Everybody who who really wanted to had, for the most part, there were bad periods, but for the most part, the ability to get a decent job at a decent wage that they could afford to send their kids to school by doing it. That tended to be, statistically and everything else, you could see it. And when that's no longer the case, it doesn't mean it wasn't the case before. Obviously, a lot of caveats. When I was growing up, and you grew up black in New Orleans, it was different than growing up white. But even for any race, you would end up being better off than your parents were 80% of the time.
Do you think it's possible to revive the American dream in
Yeah,
2025?
and I think we all have to be a little bit humble and say, what did we do wrong?
Yeah.
And I'll put it on myself. Where did I get things wrong? Well, one of the beliefs I had, which was a conventional belief, was something that Bill Clinton and George Bush, W. Bush, could agree on, which is the value of free trade, NAFTA, getting China into the World Trade Organization. And we believed in free trade. We believed in free movement of capital, free movements of people. We believed in globalization. And we believed that would make economic growth. We were right. It made economic growth. What we forgot to say was it left a lot of people behind. My relatives in Bogalusa, Louisiana, who had furniture stores and manufactured furniture and paper products and what, that all got offshore to Malaysia or somewhere else. There's not as many middle-class jobs. And so that era of globalization that many of us took on faith, it did a lot of good, but it hollowed out a working middle class that knew that they could, nowadays, if you live in Keokuk, Iowa, you go to the Walmart on a Sunday night and buy a flat screen TV real cheap. But you can't get up at 8 a.m. and go to the Maytag plant or the Delco plant that used to be there because those have been offshored. And
support a family on a single job.
Support a family on a single, whatever. Have a good job at good wages. Retire with a watch. Punch in every day at 8, And when you lose that in an economy and you add that to social and digital and other media that divides rather than unites us, you're going to get a backlash against this notion of democracy can deliver for us all.
And other, what might seem like auxiliary symptoms, but I think this also relates to rise in anti-Semitism as a result of,
Well, I think you tend to always blame the other. Immigrants. You can be anti-Semitic. You can, and you do not believe in a tolerant, inclusive democracy as easily if you feel you've been, excuse my language, screwed by the system. And the problem is you don't want all these backlashes and anti-Semitisms and racism. But there is some truth that a whole bunch of people, the system worked for other people, but not them. There are people, we're sitting in a zip code where a lot of, Manhattan, where a lot of people did well, but in the era of globalization, but a lot of people got left out and they're resentful, and it's understandable.
This has been the animating issue on the right, particularly the idea of, reshoring jobs or protectionist policies. I think some people on the left would say it's sort of a hollow promise. The jobs aren't coming back.
Well, wait, I always jump on your premise. I don't mean to.
No, please.
But there
are
a lot
good.
of Democrats, including even Joe Biden, that believed actually in some tariffs. He was not somebody pushing NAFTA, and he also believed in bringing back manufacturing. Now, it's easier said than done. I don't think it's necessarily a left, right, or Democratic, Republican issue. And I certainly think that a lot of Republicans were ardent free traders. I mean,
It's almost more of like if you think of the horseshoe model, where the establishment of the left and the right
The
were
establishment
on
were
free
definitely
trade,
afraid of
and
free
now
trade.
the fringes on both sides. I mean,
And I was
Bernie
part of the
Sanders and Trump.
establishment. I'm almost a definition of, the old media establishment who bought into the globalization and the Davos, Washington, Aspen consensus.
Yeah.
It was establishment. It was not left-right.
What I meant by that is more so that was Trump's issue when he ran in 2016 and then again in 2020.
Correct.
And he made more of an issue out of it than I think the left did, despite what you're saying,
more
which
of
is
an
true
issue
also.
than Biden. I don't know if you consider him the left, but I think Biden, left to his own devices, might have been a little bit more protectionist and done a little bit more to bring manufacturing back, and it would have been a smart thing to do.
Do you think it works?
Yeah, I think that people say you can't manufacture in America. You can't have factories. Well, first of all, I've just written about Elon Musk. He has the biggest factories and all. He makes cars. He makes batteries. He makes rocket ships. Americans can do it. And do you have to put the thumb on the scale a bit? I kind of follow Orrin Cass, and you talk about conservatives. I think J.D. Vance has talked about it too, which is, I don't like it the way Trump's doing, which is random scattershot tariffs that are 100% and 2% and 200%. But I think you put your thumb on the scale a little bit to say, we're going to favor doing things where people in this country can be assured they can have good jobs and good wages. You can bring back total manufacturing? No. Bring it back 10%, 15%. That would be fine.
To bring it back to the book, where obviously, as you're mentioning, you've written this book in a time where it feels like we're in a bit of political disarray, as you and I are talking about.
I keep pushing on your premises. I think we're in a lot of disarray.
We're in a lot. No, it's good to push on my premises. And, what do you want people to take away from the book, first and foremost, as people are trying to sort the political moment that we're in?
I think, right now we're leading into Thanksgiving. A lot of people thinking, all right, how am I going to put up with my aunt from Bogalusa and my uncle from, Shreveport, who are, whatever. But we come together as a family. And we can find the common ground. Well, we got the big one coming up, the 250th birthday.
Yeah.
What I want this book to be about, and the takeaway of the book, is for at least 1 year. We can go back if we need to, but I bet we won't. If we could break the fever, make sure our hair's not on fire, that we aren't always enraging people and making everything divisive. Like, should you get a vaccine or divisive? No. Let people decide. And for our 250th birthday, not only reflect on our values and common ground, but maybe even do it by reflecting on the sentence. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And not only just chanting the sentence, but saying, what did they mean by the pursuit of happiness? To me, that actually means the American dream. So what's gone wrong with it? Let's spend the 250th having a unifying celebration. I'm old enough to remember Vietnam, Watergate, the riots of the late 60s. But then, for our 50th, we came together for the bicentennial. Gerald Ford, people of all parties. Suddenly, we calmed down. I'm hoping we can do that 50 years later and say, let's think every morning when we get up, what can I do in my politics, in my discourse, in my social media to try to enable people who are trying to unite us rather than playing into the divisions, both in how you vote and what you say and how you deal with people. And I think if we all made a real effort, as Ben Franklin said, assuredly we must all hang together. That's a life and death struggle they had 250 years ago, is with all these things trying to divide us, how are we going to hang together? Well, it's an individual effort that we all know. We all know in our bones. How can we get along with people better? How can we, if we have a racist or anti-Semitic dark thought flying through our head, how do we say, no, I'm better than that, as opposed to let me tweet it out? It's not that difficult.
I was going to make one comment about how the words are both unifying and also radical, and how people can have radical ideas and also come together.
Sure, you don't have to agree
Yeah.
in order to come together. You have to have some respect, tolerance for free speech, some civility. But here's the one I would go back to Franklin on. You also have to have a bit of humility. At the Constitutional Convention, 11 years after they do the Declaration, Franklin's still there in Philadelphia. And they're tearing themselves apart. Slow on slavery, big state, little state, equal votes per state, House, Senate. They finally make a compromise. And Franklin says he's twice as old as everybody, the average age in that convention for the Constitution. And he says, the older I get, something very strange happens to me. I realize I've been wrong at times. And maybe you should do that as well, is look at the person you disagree with and think, maybe someday I'll realize I'm wrong and they were right. And that helped him call for the vote that does the House-Senate compromise and many things that is really held together to this day.
Well, the book is The Greatest Sentences Ever Written. Walter Isaacson, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.